Anger was never the enemy the samurai feared most. Steel could be parried. Death could be accepted. But anger was different. It entered quietly, tightened the breath, narrowed the eyes, and turned skill into recklessness. One moment of uncontrolled emotion was enough to destroy years of discipline. In feudal Japan, a warrior did not ask how to express anger. He asked how to end it at the root. Not suppress it. Not vent it. Eliminate it before it formed. This was not moral philosophy. It was survival science. A mind clouded by rage could not read the battlefield. A body flooded with emotion moved too early or too late. Anger made a swordsman predictable, and predictability meant death. Modern life is not a battlefield of blades, yet the nervous system does not know this. Your body reacts to disrespect, delay, or uncertainty the same way it once reacted to an ambush. Muscles tense. Heart rate spikes. Vision narrows. Words sharpen. You feel justified, but you are no longer free. Most people live inside this cycle without realizing it. They believe anger gives strength, boundaries, identity. The samurai saw something else. They saw anger as a leakage of life force, a signal that the mind had lost its center. And they developed a technique so precise that it could dissolve anger before it reached the muscles, before it reached the voice, before it became action. This method was not spiritual decoration. It was trained daily, tested under pressure, and passed down quietly between masters and students. It worked because it addressed the body first, the breath second, and the mind last. The order matters. Reverse it, and anger wins. Today, neuroscience confirms what these warriors understood without machines. Anger is not a personality flaw. It is a conditioned physiological loop. And any loop, once seen clearly, can be interrupted. The question is not whether anger should disappear. The question is whether you are ready to stop feeding it. Chapter 1: The Awakening. The first awakening does not arrive with peace. It arrives with repetition. A samurai would notice it in the smallest moments. The tightening of the jaw before a duel. The impatience when waiting for instruction. The surge of heat when challenged by someone weaker. At first, these reactions felt useful. They felt like readiness. But over time, a pattern emerged. The same emotions arose in the same situations, and each time they pulled the body out of alignment. This is where awakening begins. Not in wisdom, but in friction. The warrior starts to see that anger is not random. It has a schedule. It appears at predictable triggers and disappears just as predictably, leaving exhaustion behind. The sword arm feels heavy. The breath becomes shallow. Awareness narrows. Afterward comes regret, or worse, justification. The samurai did not call this a moral failure. He called it a loss of center. In Japanese training halls, students were taught to observe themselves long before they were taught to fight. A master would watch a young warrior bow, walk, sit, and breathe. From this, he could see the hidden storms. Anger revealed itself not in shouting, but in stiffness. In rushing. In the inability to wait without tension. Modern psychology describes this as a conditioned response loop. The nervous system learns to associate certain stimuli with threat, even when no real danger exists. The body reacts first. The mind arrives later with explanations. By the time anger is felt consciously, the cycle is already in motion. The samurai discovered this through lived experience. They noticed that the moment anger appeared, something had already gone wrong internally. Attention had left the present. The body had abandoned balance. The breath had lost depth. Anger was not the cause. It was the symptom. There is a quiet moment when this realization lands. You begin to see that you are not angry because of the world. You are angry because something inside you is untrained. This is not an insult. It is an opening. In that opening, responsibility replaces blame. The warrior understands that if anger can be predicted, it can be studied. If it can be studied, it can be dissolved. Not by force, but by precision. Just as a swordsman does not swing wildly, he does not confront the mind with violence. This is the awakening the samurai respected. The moment you stop identifying with your reactions and start observing them as movements of energy. The moment you realize that every surge of anger is an invitation to return to center. From here, the path becomes narrow, disciplined, and exact. Chapter 2, The Ancient Principle. The samurai did not begin with anger. They began with balance. Long before combat training, warriors were introduced to a principle older than the sword itself. Mushin. A state of no fixed mind. Not emptiness in the passive sense, but fluid awareness without attachment. A mind that does not cling, resist, or rehearse. A mind that allows sensations to pass without interruption. Anger cannot survive in such a space. In Zen monasteries, this principle was trained through posture before philosophy. A student would be corrected not for what he thought, but for how he sat. Spine upright. Chin relaxed. Belly soft. Breath slow and unbroken. The body was treated as the gateway. When the body held tension, the mind followed. When the body returned to balance, the mind softened naturally. The samurai absorbed this understanding deeply. On the battlefield, there was no time to manage emotions. Any technique that required inner dialogue was already too late. So they trained the state that preceded emotion. Presence without preference. Anger arises when the mind grips reality and demands it be different. Mushin removes the grip. There is perception, but no argument. There is action, but no emotional residue. The warrior moves, responds, and completes the motion without carrying it forward. This principle was not passive. It was alert and sharp. A mind without fixation sees more, not less. Without anger, reaction time improved. Decision-making became cleaner. The samurai learned that calm was not softness. Calm was clarity under pressure. Modern neuroscience mirrors this insight. When attention remains anchored in bodily sensation and breath, the brain reduces activity in threat-based circuits. The amygdala quiets. The prefrontal regions regain influence. Emotion does not vanish through suppression. It dissolves through regulation. The ancient teachers understood this without language. They observed that when a warrior maintained continuous breath and relaxed vision, anger never fully formed. It attempted to arise, but found no tension to attach to. This is why the samurai did not train anger management. They trained non-attachment in motion. Walking, drawing the blade, returning it to the sheath. Each movement was an opportunity to practice a mind that does not cling. There is a subtle shift that occurs when this principle is understood. You stop asking how to control anger. You start asking how to remain ungrasping. Control implies conflict. Mushin implies alignment. In this way, the ancient principle reframes the entire problem. Anger is not an enemy to defeat. It is a signal that presence has been abandoned. Return to presence, and anger has nowhere to stand. This realization is quiet, almost anticlimactic. Yet it changes everything. Chapter 3, The Internal War. Anger feels sudden, but it is slow beneath the surface. Inside the body, a quiet war begins long before the mind notices. The nervous system detects threat, often imaginary, often symbolic. A look. A delay. A challenge to identity. The body does not wait for interpretation. It prepares for impact. Blood moves to the limbs. Breathing rises into the chest. Muscles harden without permission. This is not emotion yet. This is biology. The samurai understood that once this cascade reached the muscles, choice vanished. The body would act, and the mind would justify afterward. What most people call losing temper is actually losing timing. The response arrives too early or too late because the system is flooded. Fear hides inside anger. Not fear of harm, but fear of loss. Loss of status. Loss of control. Loss of being seen as capable. Anger masks this vulnerability with heat and force. It feels powerful, but it is reactive. And reaction is always late. In ancient training, warriors were taught to feel the earliest signal. Not the thought, but the bodily shift. A tightening behind the eyes. A subtle holding of breath. A forward lean of attention. These were the real battlegrounds. This is the moment most people never see. If the signal is missed, the nervous system locks into fight mode. Vision narrows. Hearing dulls. Language sharpens into weapons. The body commits to a story of opposition. Me versus them. Right versus wrong. Respect versus humiliation. The samurai called this being pulled out of center. A centered body distributes tension evenly. Breath remains low and continuous. Awareness stays wide. In this state, stimuli pass through without sticking. The internal war never escalates because there is no inner division. Here, something subtle becomes clear. Anger is not too strong. Awareness is too narrow. There is a quiet dignity in noticing this without judgment. When the samurai felt the first stirrings of imbalance, they did not correct the mind. They corrected the body. A longer exhale. A softening of the shoulders. A widening of vision to include the periphery. These adjustments interrupted the loop before emotion crystallized. Modern science confirms this sequence. The vagus nerve regulates the shift between threat and safety. Slow exhalation signals the body that survival is not immediately at risk. When the body believes this, the mind follows. Anger collapses when the body returns to safety. The internal war only exists when the system believes it must defend an identity. When identity relaxes, conflict dissolves. This chapter is not about winning against anger. It is about seeing where the war actually starts. And once seen clearly, it becomes strangely quiet. Chapter 4, The System. The samurai did not rely on insight alone. Insight fades under pressure. Systems remain. What separated the disciplined warrior from the impulsive one was not temperament, but structure. A clear method practiced when nothing was wrong, so it would function when everything was. Anger was not confronted in the moment. It was preempted through ritualized alignment. The system was simple, but unforgiving. First, posture was non-negotiable. A collapsed body invited emotional collapse. The spine remained upright, not rigid, not relaxed. Uprightness signaled readiness without aggression. This alone regulated the nervous system more than any thought ever could. Second, breath was trained to move downward. Not forced. Not controlled. Simply guided by awareness into the lower belly. The samurai understood that breath determines tempo. When breath rushed, the mind rushed. When breath slowed, perception widened. Anger cannot outrun a long exhale. Third, attention was anchored in physical sensation rather than narrative. Feet touching the ground. Weight distributed evenly. Hands aware of space. The mind was not allowed to rehearse grievances or imagined outcomes. Sensation replaced story. These three elements formed a closed loop. Posture stabilized breath. Breath stabilized attention. Attention stabilized emotion. This system was practiced constantly. Walking through corridors. Standing in silence. Drawing and returning the blade. Even bowing was used as regulation. Each movement reinforced the same internal order. The key was repetition without negotiation. The samurai did not ask how they felt before applying the system. They applied it regardless. Emotion was treated as weather, not authority. Rain did not cancel training. Anger did not alter posture. Over time, something profound occurred. The body learned safety. Not conceptual safety, but lived safety. The nervous system stopped scanning constantly for threat. Anger still attempted to arise, but found no instability to amplify it. This is the identity shift most people miss. You do not become calm by deciding to be calm. You become someone whose body no longer escalates unnecessarily. Calm becomes a byproduct, not a goal. Modern discipline often fails because it is reactive. People try to manage anger after it appears. The samurai trained so anger rarely completed its formation. The system worked because it respected sequence. Body first. Breath second. Mind last. When this order is reversed, effort multiplies and results vanish. The system does not require belief. It requires obedience. Quiet, consistent, almost boring obedience. And in that boredom, freedom quietly takes root. Chapter 5, Practice Without Gaps. The samurai did not aim for perfection. They aimed for continuity. Anger thrives in gaps. Gaps between intention and action. Between training and daily life. Between who you are in calm moments and who you become under pressure. The warrior understood that discipline collapses not from intensity, but from inconsistency. So the practice was designed to leave no openings. Each day followed the same internal order regardless of mood. Rising from sleep with posture intact. Standing before movement. Breathing before speech. These were not ceremonies for special occasions. They were applied during fatigue, irritation, boredom, and doubt. Especially then. The mistake most people make is waiting for emotional alignment before practicing regulation. The samurai reversed this logic. Regulation created alignment. If anger appeared, it was treated as a signal to return to the method, not as a reason to abandon it. This is where the system became real. A warrior could miss a strike and correct it. He could misjudge distance and adjust. But skipping practice was unacceptable. Not because of discipline as punishment, but because absence allowed old patterns to return unchecked. There was a quiet understanding among them. What you repeat becomes your refuge. In the middle of long training periods, when nothing seemed to change, this realization would surface without effort. Practice without gaps meant integrating regulation into ordinary moments. Waiting, walking, listening. Even conflict became a training ground. The body was aligned first. Breath slowed next. Attention anchored last. The sequence never changed. This removed the drama from anger. Without resistance or indulgence, it lost its intensity. It became a passing sensation rather than a defining event. Neuroscience calls this neuroplastic reinforcement. Repeated calm responses weaken threat pathways. The brain updates its expectations. Over time, triggers lose their charge because the body no longer predicts danger. The samurai did not celebrate this shift. They barely acknowledged it. Calm was not an achievement. It was the new baseline. There is something deeply humbling about this stage. You realize that progress is quiet. There are no breakthroughs, only fewer collapses. Fewer words regretted. Fewer nights replaying moments that cannot be changed. This is the discipline that lasts. Not intensity. Not inspiration. Not identity statements. Just returning, again and again, without gaps. And one day, you notice that anger no longer arrives fully formed. It appears, pauses, and dissolves before becoming action. At that point, the practice has done its work. Chapter 6, Environmental Design. The samurai knew a truth most people resist. Willpower is unreliable. Environment is decisive. They did not rely on inner strength to remain calm. They shaped the outer world so calm was the default response. Every detail of daily life was arranged to reduce unnecessary friction on the nervous system. Not for comfort, but for clarity. The training hall was sparse. No excess objects. No visual noise. The absence was intentional. A cluttered space creates a cluttered mind. When the eyes are constantly pulled outward, attention fractures. And where attention fractures, anger finds entry. Silence was another form of design. Not absolute quiet, but controlled sound. Footsteps. Breath. The rustle of clothing. These sounds anchored awareness in the present. Sudden noise was minimized, because shock destabilizes regulation. The samurai respected the nervous system as much as the blade. Even routines were engineered. Wake times were consistent. Meals were simple. Movements followed predictable sequences. This reduced decision fatigue. When the body does not constantly evaluate options, it remains settled. Anger feeds on excess choice and unresolved tension. Clothing mattered. Armor was worn only when necessary. Otherwise, garments were light and functional. Restriction was used deliberately, never habitually. The body was allowed to feel its own balance. When the body feels at home in itself, reactivity decreases. The samurai also designed their social environment. They limited unnecessary confrontation. Words were economical. Boasting was discouraged. Respectful distance prevented constant status negotiation. Many modern conflicts are not about survival, but about invisible hierarchies. The warrior stepped out of this game whenever possible. This was not avoidance. It was conservation. Energy wasted on needless agitation was energy unavailable in moments that mattered. The samurai treated emotional energy like physical stamina. Squander it early, and it will abandon you when required. There is a quiet discipline in removing what provokes you unnecessarily. Not as weakness, but as intelligence. Modern life does the opposite. Constant alerts. Endless opinions. Continuous comparison. The nervous system never rests. In such an environment, anger becomes chronic, almost reasonable. The samurai would see this as poor design. When the environment supports regulation, the inner system stabilizes effortlessly. When it does not, no amount of insight can compensate. This chapter is not about retreating from life. It is about arranging life so your deepest training is not constantly undermined. When the outer world is shaped with intention, the inner world follows without resistance. And anger, finding no chaos to amplify it, begins to fade into irrelevance. Chapter 7, Transformation. Transformation did not arrive as victory. It arrived as silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of something no longer needed. The samurai did not wake one morning free of anger. There was no announcement. No internal celebration. There was simply a growing absence of urgency. Fewer spikes. Less inner noise. More space between stimulus and response. This is how real change occurs. The body learns before the mind claims credit. The nervous system stops escalating because it no longer expects danger everywhere. Breath remains low without effort. Posture corrects itself. Attention widens naturally. Anger does not vanish through discipline. It becomes unnecessary through stability. At this stage, the warrior no longer practices to eliminate anger. He practices to remain aligned. Anger may still appear at the edges, but it is thin, almost transparent. It passes like wind through an open door. What has changed is identity. The old self reacted automatically, defended constantly, justified endlessly. The new self does not need to prove control. It embodies it. Calm is no longer something to maintain. It is what remains when resistance is gone. This is why the samurai were feared and respected. Not because they were aggressive, but because they were unshakable. Insults failed to land. Provocations found no hook. In conflict, they saw clearly because emotion did not distort perception. This clarity was not cold. It was humane. Without anger clouding judgment, compassion emerged naturally. Firmness without cruelty. Boundaries without resentment. Action without excess force. Modern science would describe this as integration. The survival system and the reasoning system no longer compete. They cooperate. Energy once consumed by inner conflict becomes available for presence, precision, and restraint. The final transformation is subtle. You stop thinking of anger as part of your personality. It becomes just another sensation, like fatigue or hunger. Informative, but not authoritative. And then one day, something reveals itself quietly. The world has not changed. People still provoke. Delays still occur. Injustice still exists. But you are no longer pulled out of center by these forces. You respond without being consumed. This is not emotional numbness. It is emotional sovereignty. The samurai never claimed to conquer anger. They outgrew it. And the final question remains, not as challenge, but as mirror. Who would you become if anger no longer decided your next move? The path does not end here. It becomes invisible. Conclusion. The samurai never searched for a life without disturbance. They prepared for disturbance so thoroughly that it lost its power. Anger, in their view, was never a moral failure or a personal flaw. It was a signal. A sign that alignment had been lost somewhere between body, breath, and attention. By restoring this order daily, quietly, without drama, they removed the conditions that allowed anger to dominate their actions. This is why their method endures. It does not depend on temperament. It does not require isolation or belief. It does not ask you to suppress what you feel or pretend to be calm. It trains the body to remain stable, so emotion no longer needs to shout to be heard. What disappears is not feeling, but compulsion. When posture is upright, breath is grounded, and attention is present, anger loses its urgency. It may still arise, but it no longer commands behavior. It becomes information rather than identity. This is the difference between control and sovereignty. Control is fragile. It breaks under stress. Sovereignty is quiet. It remains when pressure increases. The samurai cultivated sovereignty not through force, but through consistency. Through systems that functioned on ordinary days, so extraordinary moments required no effort. Modern life may not demand a sword, but it demands the same inner steadiness. The same ability to remain centered when challenged, delayed, or misunderstood. Without this steadiness, anger fills the gap. With it, clarity returns. The ancient technique was never about eliminating anger forever. It was about becoming someone who no longer needs it. Someone whose body remains safe, whose mind remains wide, whose actions remain deliberate. This path is subtle. It does not announce progress. It simply leaves fewer regrets behind. And when anger no longer shapes your decisions, something unexpected happens. Your presence becomes your strength.